around the cabin. Overhead luggage fell and people were screaming. And then she blacked out with the other bodies of passengers from the crash. I mean, the pain was absolutely intense. 90 other passengers did lose their lives. Imagine sitting on a plane, looking out the window at the endless green ocean that is the Amazon rainforest below. And you're 17 years old, and you're flying home for Christmas. Everything feels normal. The passengers are talking, the engine is humming, the rainforest stretches endlessly beneath the clouds as pure green. And then suddenly, lightning flashes. The plane shakes violently. The cabin begins to tear apart. And then suddenly, in one horrifying instant, you're no longer inside the plane. You're falling. Not sliding, not crashing, falling. 3,000 meters through open sky, strapped to a row of seats, spinning down and down toward the most dangerous jungles on Earth. Most people would assume, that's the end of the story right there. But somehow, this girl survived the fall. And what came next may be even more unbelievable, because she didn't wake up in a hospital. She woke up alone in the Amazon rainforest. No rescue teams and no supplies and no idea where she was. Just miles and miles of green jungle in every direction. And somehow she walked out alive. This is the true survival story of Juliane Koepcke. The most incredible part about her story is not the fall. It's what she remembered when survival depended upon it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Daniel Tells Stories, the channel where we explore some of the most unbelievable real stories from survival, resilience, and strength people discover when life suddenly pushes them to the absolute impossibility. Today's story feels like something written for a Hollywood survival movie. A teenage girl falls from the sky into the Amazon rainforest and somehow survives completely alone. But this isn't fiction. This actually happened. Before I continue the story, I wanted to tell you thank you for all those who've been watching this and subscribing to the channel. I know we're so close to 500 subscribers, and I really would encourage you to share these stories with other people so I can keep bringing great content like this to you. What makes this story even more powerful is Juliane Koepcke didn't survive because of superhuman strength, and she didn't survive because of unbelievable luck alone. She survived because of something far, far quieter, something planted in her life years before this disaster ever happened. So let's rewind this story to understand how this 17-year-old girl managed to survive something that should have been impossible. Juliane Koepcke was not just another passenger flying over the jungles of Peru. She was later called a jungle child. She was born in 1954 to German scientist parents who moved to Peru to study wildlife and the ecosystems of the Amazon rainforest. Her father, Hans Wilhelm Koepcke, was a zoologist, and her mother, Maria Koepcke, was an ornithologist studying tropical birds. Together, they built a biological research station deep within the rainforest called Panguana, where their work can focus on understanding the jungle and its wildlife. Something I can relate to in the endless jungle of Liberia. So Juliane's childhood was not like most people's childhood. Instead of growing up surrounded by city streets or classrooms, she grew up surrounded by rainforest sound, insects, rivers, and wildlife. Yeah, me too. Her parents taught her how jungle life worked. They taught her which plants were dangerous. They taught her how rivers lead to people. And they taught her how to respect the environment and rather than panic inside of it, which it can feel that way when you get stuck in there. At times, these lessons probably just felt like part of daily life. But years later, these quiet lessons become the difference between life and death. In December 1971, Juliane and her mother were traveling back to Panguana Research Station to spend Christmas with her father. One small decision, though, changed everything. Her mother wanted to leave earlier. Juliane didn't want to miss her graduation celebration, so they delayed their trip. And on that Christmas Eve, they boarded Lanza Flight 508. At first, the flight just felt ordinary. Juliane sat by the window, her mother sat beside her. and below them stretched the endless Amazon rainforest. And then the weather changed, as it does quickly in the jungle. Dark storms swallowed the sky, and lightning flashed around the aircraft. The plane began to shake violently with turbulence and threw passengers around the cabin. Overhead luggage fell, and people were screaming. And then Juliane saw something, the most terrifying thing. A blinding white flash which struck the wing. Her mother, who had always been nervous about flying, looked at her calmly and said something chilling. "I hope this all goes well." And moments later, she said another sentence that Juliane would never forget. "Now, it's all over." And seconds later, the aircraft disintegrated. Juliane later described that moment sending the waves chills down the spine. She said, "I was no longer inside the plane. I was outside in the open air. The plane had just simply left me." She was still strapped into the row of seats, and she began falling from the sky. The last thing she remembered is seeing the rainforest canopy below, looking at it like a tiny little broccoli head stretching out in the endless horizon. And then she blacked out. When Juliane opened her eyes again, the world was silent, and so was the sky above her. The jungle surrounded her everywhere. She could hear the animals crying in the forest. But she was lying down on the forest floor, 17 years old, all alone. Against every law of physics and probability, she had survived a fall of nearly 3,000 meters. Her injuries were serious, but not instantly fatal. There was a broken collarbone and cuts across her shoulder and legs, a concussion, and she had lost her glasses, and she had only one sandal. Her dress was torn, but miraculously, she was alive. And that, unfortunately, is when the real nightmare began. Because surviving the fall only meant one thing. Now, she had to survive the jungle. When she finally could get up, Juliane tried to find her mother. She wandered through the crash area, calling for her and searching the wreckage. But the jungle, as it is enormous and disorienting. And she realizing something even more terrifying. She might only be the only one alive. And that's when the lessons from her childhood began returning to her mind instantly. Her father had taught her something important about survival in the rainforest. Follow the water. Because streams eventually lead to rivers, and rivers eventually lead to people. So instead of wandering randomly through the jungle, Juliane began walking along a small stream she found. And that decision alone may have saved her life. She knew better than to eat random fruit because many of the jungle plants are poisonous. She understood the sounds of birds and the insects. She understood the patterns of the rainforest environment. Still, the jungle was very, very terrifying. But it wasn't completely unfamiliar, and that familiarity and that comfort gave her just enough clarity to keep her moving. For 10 days, Juliane struggled through the rainforest. She survived on a tiny packet of candy she had found. Rain soaked her constantly. Mosquitoes attacked her wounds. Her broken collarbone made every step absolutely painful. Yet she continued walking along the river. At one point, she heard the cries of king vultures, which means something was dead nearby. So she followed them and discovered the other bodies of passengers from the crash. One of them was a woman, and she looked at the woman's toes to see if it was her mother. She saw nail polish, but her mother never wore nail polish. So that moment gave her both a sigh of relief, but also heartbreak, of course, at the same time. Because if her mother wasn't there, she might be also elsewhere out in the jungle. But days kept passing, and Juliane kept growing weaker and weaker. Her wounds were becoming infected. Maggots began living inside the wound in her shoulder. And even in that moment, she remembered something her father had once done while treating an injured animal. He poured fuel over the wound to force the parasites out. So when Juliane eventually did find a small hut near the river, she found a container of gasoline. And so she poured that into her wound. I mean, the pain was absolutely intense, but the maggots did come out. She said she removed about 30 of them. And strangely, she felt very proud about that because she was surviving it. That moment of survival really changes a person. It pushes you past fear, past comfort, past everything you thought you couldn't do and couldn't endure. On that 10th day, Juliane woke up and heard something unbelievable. She thought it wasn't true at first. Human voices. 3 local fishermen had arrived near the hut. At first, they were absolutely terrified by what they saw. Here was a pale, injured girl emerging from the jungle, covered in dirt, wearing a torn dress and just one sandal. Some of them thought she might be a ghost or a spirit from the river. But Juliane spoke to them in Spanish, and she explained who she was. And just like that, after 10 days of being alone in the Amazon rainforest, her nightmare had finally become to an end. Juliane Koepcke became the only known survivor of Lancet Flight 508. 90 other passengers did lose their lives. And for years, people asked the same question. Why did she survive? Maybe it was luck? Maybe the seat spun like a falling seed, slowing her descent. Maybe the thick jungle canopy softened the impact when she fell through it. But the survival wasn't just about the fall. The real miracle is what happened afterwards. Juliane survived because she remembered the knowledge her parents had given her years earlier. She followed the river. She avoided dangerous fruit and plants. And she stayed calm when panic could have taken her and killed her. These lessons guided her through one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Later in life, Juliane became a biologist, continuing the same scientific work her parents had dedicated their lives to. She returned to the jungle that nearly killed her. Not with fear, though, but with purpose. And maybe that's the deepest lesson in this story. Sometimes survival doesn't come from strength alone. Sometimes it comes from the quiet lessons planted in us long before the disaster ever arrives. Juliane Koepcke fell from the sky in the sea that's called the Amazon rainforest. But because of her knowledge and courage and the will to keep on, she walked out. If this story has amazed you like it did me when I found it, make sure you like and subscribe to Daniel Tells Stories for more powerful real-life survival stories from around the world. I know we're getting there so close to 500 subscribers. It'd be great, because sometimes the most unbelievable stories are not fiction, they're real. And they remind us that even after falling from the sky, the human spirit can still rise. I'll see you next time.